Welcome to U.S. History to 1877. In this course, you will survey the major themes, events, and ideas of American history through Reconstruction.
I'm Jordan O'Connell, History and Government Instructor at Northeast Iowa Community College. This lecture distills a decade of my written notes taken from Alan Brinkley's The Unfinished Nation, The American Yawp, and our course-assigned OpenStax U.S. History textbook. This lecture focuses on West African knowledge, Atlantic slavery, and cultural survival. The core question is this: how did African knowledge, labor, religion, and memory become part of American life through the violence of Atlantic slavery? The core competency is to characterize cultural elements from Africa incorporated into American life. What happens to an Atlantic world when merchants and monarchs decide that African labor, knowledge, and bodies can be priced as cargo? The Atlantic slave trade did not begin with a people without history. West Africa before large-scale Atlantic slavery contained states, trade routes, cities, religious centers, and agricultural systems that Europeans entered for profit. Ghana, Mali, and Songhai are familiar names because they controlled important regional networks across centuries. Gold, salt, cola nuts, cloth, livestock, and scholarly exchange moved through trans-Saharan routes, linking West Africa to North Africa and the wider Islamic world. Cities such as Timbuktu and Gao became centers of commerce and learning. Political rulers taxed trade, managed armies, and negotiated power within a larger regional world. That history is decisive because it changes the starting point. Europeans did not create West African exchange. They inserted themselves into existing systems and then redirected them toward Atlantic demand. Coastal and inland societies already included farmers, fishers, merchants, metalworkers, religious scholars, and political leaders. Some communities practiced Islam, others followed local religious traditions, many used sophisticated family and kinship structures to organize social life. These were functioning societies that encountered European traders under conditions that would shift rapidly once plantation labor demand rose. Agriculture formed part of that older expertise. In rice-growing regions of West Africa, farmers understood irrigation, flooding patterns, and field management in ways that later became crucial in the Americas. Knowledge of cattle, metallurgy, weaving, and food processing also traveled in human memory when people were seized and shipped across the ocean. The Atlantic system would exploit labor, but it also absorbed skill. European contact along the African coast expanded during the 15th century through Portuguese voyages. Traders sought gold first, then increasingly tied commerce to human trafficking. Coastal forts and exchange points developed where captives, goods, and information moved under armed pressure and negotiated arrangements. The process varied across regions, yet the broad direction became clear. European shipping capacity and plantation growth created a rising market for enslaved labor, and West Africa stood at the center of that market. The first fact to keep in place then is straightforward. African cultural elements entered the New World because Africans themselves were forced into the New World. Their languages, farming knowledge, songs, spiritual practices, and family habits crossed the Atlantic inside bodies subjected to violence. Culture did not float across as a harmless influence. It crossed through captivity. The background to Atlantic slavery includes the rise of plantation agriculture in Atlantic islands and the Caribbean. Portuguese and Spanish experiments on islands such as Madeira, Sao Tome, and the Canary Islands demonstrated how sugar cultivation could generate wealth when land, mills, shipping, and labor worked together. Sugar demanded exhausting field labor, processing equipment, and strict time discipline because cane spoiled quickly after harvest. Plantation owners therefore sought a workforce they could control with force. European colonizers first tried several labor sources in different regions. Native labor was coerced through systems such as encomienda, repartimiento, and direct seizure. Disease, warfare, and brutal working conditions weakened many indigenous communities and reduced the labor pool colonizers wanted to exploit. Colonists then expanded their dependence on enslaved Africans, whom traders could transport in large numbers through a growing Atlantic market. The shift did not happen because African labor was naturally suited to the work. It happened because plantation owners wanted workers they could buy, discipline, and treat as property. Barbados became a major example in the 17th century. English planters transformed the island into a sugar colony built on enslaved labor. Plantation wealth there helped spread slave-based production models into other English colonies. Jamaica followed a similar pattern after English conquest in 1655. In the Spanish and Portuguese worlds, plantation and mining systems also deepened the demand for captives. By the time mainland colonies expanded tobacco and rice production, the Atlantic economy already linked shipping, insurance, credit, slave trading, and plantation management together. This labor market required capital and paperwork. Investors financed voyages. Ship captains purchased food, shackles, and trade goods. Merchants insured cargo. Colonial buyers used credit to purchase captives on arrival. Port officials recorded imports and duties. Planters entered enslaved people in account books as assets. The slave trade worked as a business system before it hardened fully into a racial ideology. Across the 16th and 17th centuries, racial law and hereditary slavery gave the system greater stability and cruelty. The world before the Middle Passage therefore contained a plantation template already moving outward. Sugar profits taught Europeans that immense wealth could be extracted through coerced labor. Once that lesson settled into Atlantic commerce, the demand for captives rose sharply. The Middle Passage names the forced Atlantic voyage from Africa to the Americas, but the phrase can sound too small for the reality. Captives were confined in packed holds, chained, inspected, sold, punished, and treated as cargo. Disease spread rapidly, food and water were rationed. Ship crews used violence to suppress resistance. Mortality at sea remained high, and death continued after arrival through sale, seasoning, and plantation labor. The Middle Passage was a moving prison tied to commercial calculation. Ship captains operated under their own pressures. Investors expected profit. Delays cut into supplies. Disease could reduce sale value. Rebellion threatened the voyage. Captains therefore measured captives through numbers, weight, age, and expected price. Commercial records reduced people to units of exchange, yet the people in the hold were never simply passive cargo. Captives resisted through refusal to eat, revolt, sabotage, mourning rituals, and efforts to preserve kin ties under catastrophic conditions. Plantation buyers in the Americas wanted laborers with specific skills and physical endurance. In colonies growing rice, indigo, sugar, or tobacco, planters recognized that African experience shaped production. South Carolina rice culture depended heavily on expertise brought by enslaved Africans from rice-growing regions. Irrigation patterns, embankment work, and flood control drew on knowledge that colonists themselves did not possess in full. Planters sought to exploit that expertise while denying the humanity of the people who carried it. Enslaved Africans also preserved cultural forms after arrival. Family bonds were broken repeatedly, yet people rebuilt networks through naming practices, marriage strategies, fictive kin, religion, music, and shared labor. Drumming, dance, call and response patterns, cooking methods, burial customs, and oral storytelling all helped sustain communal memory. Christianity spread among many enslaved people, but often through forms reshaped by African rhythm, interpretation, and collective worship. Cultural survival did not cancel suffering. It marks what people kept alive inside a system designed to break them. Colonial legal systems then converted labor exploitation into inherited status. Chattel slavery treated enslaved people as property that owners could buy, sell, mortgage, and pass to heirs. Virginia and other colonies hardened racial distinctions through laws that tied status to African ancestry and maternal descent. That legal move hardened slavery because it made slavery self-reproducing. Children inherited bondage, planters inherited labor claims, courts enforced the arrangement, violence remained central, but statutes gave violence regular form. Bartolomé de las Casas wrote a short account of the destruction of the Indies in 1552 to expose Spanish brutality in the Americas. His text describes conquest, forced labor, massacre, and the devastation of native communities. He wrote from inside the imperial and Christian world, yet he described clearly how greed and domination worked in practice. One of his lines describes how conquerors made some progress in this work of destruction. The phrase is decisive because it turns the usual imperial vocabulary against empire itself. Progress in this case means destruction, not improvement. Las Casas helps explain the labor problem that shaped the Atlantic system. Spanish conquest and disease shattered many indigenous communities, yet colonizers still wanted mines worked and plantations supplied. The pressure for labor did not disappear when native populations collapsed under violence and epidemic disease. Colonizers looked for another coerced workforce, and African slavery expanded inside that demand. Las Casas' text does not give a full history of the transatlantic slave trade, but it illuminates the imperial appetite that made the trade seem useful to colonizers. The pressure sits here. A Christian critic can describe conquest honestly while the imperial system keeps searching for labor and profit. Moral exposure did not shut the machinery down. Plantation zones expanded. Slave ships kept crossing. Colonial governments kept writing laws that protected property claims and people. One document could identify destruction, yet the broader commercial structure continued to reward it. The text also helps clarify why the phrase cultural exchange fails when used carelessly. African influence in the Americas came through coercion, sale, and inheritance of bondage. Rice cultivation, foodways, music, language patterns, and religion moved into American life because enslaved Africans carried them under compulsion. The source keeps violence visible so that culture is not detached from the conditions that moved it. Las Casas therefore belongs in the record as a witness to imperial extraction and as proof that brutality was seen at the time. The Atlantic system did not operate in ignorance. It operated despite criticism because profits, land, and labor made the criticism easier to ignore than the income. The consequence of Atlantic slavery was structural, demographic, and cultural at once. Plantation wealth in sugar, tobacco, rice, and later cotton depended on African labor. Port cities, insurers, merchants, shipbuilders, and lenders all profited from the trade in people and plantation goods. Colonial governments taxed commerce and enforced property law. African slavery therefore shaped the material development of the Americas at every level, from field labor to imperial finance. African cultural elements entered the New World through that same structure. Rice cultivation in the Carolinas, food traditions using okra and other ingredients, musical rhythm, call and response worship, spiritual practice, storytelling forms, and language patterns all bear African influence. Family reconstruction after sale and separation became another kind of cultural work. Enslaved people made marriages, named children, and built communities under conditions intended to deny stable family life. That persistence helped create African American culture inside slavery rather than after it. The law tried to narrow that culture into property status. Slave codes restricted movement, assembly, literacy, and self-defense. Patrol systems watched the roads. Owners used whipping, sale, and confinement to maintain labor discipline. Yet the more complete the control system became, the more clearly it revealed how much planters feared resistance and independence. Cultural survival never erased powerlessness, and it still proved that the plantation could not fully erase memory. The Atlantic slave trade also changed the balance of peoples in the New World. African descendants became central to the population of many colonies and islands. Their work cleared fields, built dikes, processed sugar, cured tobacco, and produced export wealth that imperial powers measured in ledgers and customs receipts. A factual account of early America therefore has to describe African people as creators of the New World, even when the legal system tried to define them only as labor. The historical consequence is clear. The Americas became African, European, and indigenous together, but not on equal terms. African cultural elements did not arrive through peaceful blending. They arrived through a commercial system of kidnapping, transport, sale, and hereditary bondage. The resulting societies carried that coercion in their laws and their wealth while carrying African knowledge in their crops, music, worship, language, and community life. Markets in Charleston, Bridgetown, Havana, and other ports made that contradiction visible. Auction blocks, customs records, shipping schedules, and plantation ledgers all showed African people treated as saleable property, even while colonial households, fields, and churches depended on their labor and cultural presence every day. The unresolved judgment rests in the gap between those two facts. A colonial order that denied African freedom still depended on African skill, endurance, and memory. Later American life inherited both the wealth produced by slavery and the culture created by people forced to survive within it. The record already shows African knowledge and African suffering at the foundation of the Atlantic world. The harder judgment is what kind of society can keep consuming the culture and labor of a people whose freedom it prices and denies. That contradiction remains built into the wealth and memory the system left behind.
If you're curious how I'm using AI to build these lectures and reshape higher education, visit thelibertytolearn.com. I'll see you in class.